Hello there. In today's tutorial, I want to explore with Ian how different kinds of knowledge come to children according to how close to the event we put them in their drama as they explore that particular event. So Ian, you and I know that all social events that we're always entering into in our real lives are experienced very much from the point of, I am in this event, it is now happening to me.
Right. Yeah.
And a great deal of drama in classrooms takes place along those lines. Shall we all agree that we are in a cafe or we are, in this case, we've set up the map of Jerusalem again and the road from Jerusalem to Jericho.
Yes.
So you see, the normal way in which drama would explore the event of the Good Samaritan would be that a Good Samaritan, it doesn't look a bit like a Samaritan really, but if the children were enacting the event as the story tells us, you'd have your Samaritan going from Jerusalem to Jericho. You'd have him set upon by thieves. I mean, these are just symbols. So you see, you've got 4 in your cast. Then you've got 5 in your cast because a priest comes by and does nothing. Then you've got sort of 6 in your cast as a Levite passes by on the same road from Jerusalem to Jericho and does nothing. And finally, the Samaritan passes by and takes the sick man to the inn.
Right.
So normally that is the frame of reference in which teachers tend to think about doing drama with children.
Right.
Now, my feeling is that if you do this, the children have to behave as if they know about living in biblical times. They have to be able to take on the personas of priests with responsibility for priestly things and so on, and to get depth in such an event, which is a truly terrible event, that a man is set upon, and 2 people who are dedicated to humanity do nothing, and then an enemy of his tribe comes along and assists him. It is portentous, it's enormous. But if they have to try to live in those times, to behave as those people, frequently they end up being a little bit shabby.
Yes.
And it's very hard for the teacher and for the children.
Yes.
Now, according to the point at which you learn about an event, changes how you understand the event. If it happens to you, you've a totally different understanding of it. You'll never be able to communicate that understanding really fully. But if it happens to somebody else, and you learn of it because they tell you of it, your coming to terms with this horrendous situation will be quite different. You'll get quite different kinds of knowing. Now, I've isolated about 9 distances from this event of the Good Samaritan. And I want to try to show you how these different distances and viewpoints that the children would enter this material of a terrible mugging will actually breed in them different kinds of knowledge. So if you don't mind being a bit patient, I'll try to talk you through them, because I haven't got a class of children. I can show this to you and prove it. Now, I've isolated these 9, as I said. Now, you see, if it really happens to us, we're participants. If we're participants, we have to understand all the depth of our lives, our responsibilities, and so on. And everybody's entering it from a different viewpoint. Thieves have to know about thieving. Levites have to know about Leviting. But
that's what
if you learn about this terrible mugging through a guide who saw it or was in it, your visualization of how terrible it must have been will be totally differently informed. You won't have seen the landscape, you'll have heard about it. The questions you ask will come because of the way it was told to you.
Yes.
Now, every one of these then provides the children and you, as a teacher, with a totally different way of understanding the terrible events of the Good Samaritan. Now, don't think, if you work as an artist, if the class worked as artists, don't think they won't experience this event as a truly terrible thing. They still will.
Right.
But they'll experience it because in order to use the story in a new way, perhaps to paint it, or make a stained glass window of it for a church or a hospice, they have to look really closely into it. So don't think that the further down on this scale you are, the less they are close to the Good Samaritan. So the skill for you, if you want to use this notion of framing, and this is a phrase used by Irving Goffman, who's a sociologist. He says, all events are framed according to the window that you look at them from. So you put a frame round. And if you talk about them, that frame is in the way you talk. If you weren't there but you've only heard about it, and then you tell it to somebody else, you hone the language that reminds the person you're telling that you didn't see it, you weren't there, but you heard about it. Well, she told me, and from what she said, all that kind of thing goes on, you see. So I want to try to talk you through those 9 frames.
Right. And I found the idea of windows very helpful, actually.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Good. You're shedding light on it,
Yes.
you see. You're shedding light on it. But in each case, it is the Good Samaritan's terrible dilemma, or the priest's choice, or the thieves, or the innkeepers. We're always going to realize this is a terrible event. If I only tell it, I can get away with it, and it doesn't sound bad at all. Well, it just passed by, and then he passed by, and so on and so on. But when you break that down, as we started to do in an earlier tutorial, you see, you've 22 episodes in the Good Samaritan.
Yes.
Bathing his wounds with oil and wine is a whole experience. So in seeking to explore this simple-seeming story, you've 22 kinds of experience available, provided you don't just run through it in that order, right?
Yes.
Now we're back to the old business of what context will we set up then in our classroom so that the children find it's absorbing to explore this story. Right?
Okay.
Now let's take the second one, the guide. Now in each case I've thought of a context for you. Now I've put these colours on because I want to keep reminding you red is close to the danger. Now they're all different shades of red, but they're all red. There's no pinks or pale greens. Now I'm here, it's happening to me. That's when the children would be participants in the robbery, or the priest leave out the cast, as you might say. We've been through that. Now then, this is the guide one.
Right.
I saw it. I can relive it for you. I can show you what happened. I saw, I can tell, I can be your guide. Now, if a teacher wants to use that way of getting at the Good Samaritan, she's got to find a system whereby the children in the days of the robbery, that's biblical times, were in a position to see it happen. So the context I've chosen, and that's why I've put on our map the shepherd's hut and a compound for the sheep.
Right.
So you see, I'm going to start my children off, if I want to use guides. Guides always are full of emotion. It's happened. I saw it, it's terrible, and it's only just happened.
Yes.
So I first have to sequence what will help the children, first of all, establish they are shepherds. So I have to deal with that first. Don't ask me how for a minute, because I'm trying to deal with this.
Yes.
The second thing is, under what circumstances were they enabled to witness a mugging?
Right.
And what are they afraid of now? Now, the context I've set in then is some shepherds saw a terrible robbery, but they know the thieves saw them.
Right.
And they live in fear that if the thieves come back, they could suffer terribly. Because from what they saw, if you look at this, they saw quite terrible robbery. You see, they stripped somebody, they beat somebody, and they left him half dead. And if they saw us watching, as they probably did, our lives now may be in danger.
Right.
Who do we tell? What kinds of protection do we seek? I mean, in modern times we might go to the police, but who do we go to? So that would be the sequence of events. I first have to get into shepherds. Then I have to get into seeing the robbery. Now, to see the robbery, I can't actually set it up, because otherwise I might as well have done it in the first place.
Yes, I see.
So I need the conventions that we've spoken of before. How could as a group of shepherds feel they'd been there watching? And for that I can use my conventions. Right?
Right.
Who do they then tell? Guides have to have an audience. I've thought to myself, somebody they might tell is their wives, who live in these houses over here, and who wouldn't have seen the robbery happen down there because they might have been busy with the children. Shepherds could see it because they're high up directly above the bridge in our rather crude map. How do they tell their wives? Now you see, it is the questioning of the shepherds that helps them experience how terrible the robbery of the Good Samaritan was. The shepherds would see all the way down to the inn. They would see where the thieves went. They would see how the donkey with the oil jars, whatever the merchant was carrying, was taken away. And so the questioner would be very important in this. So I would be the wife.
Right.
At first.
Yes.
When it came to what's happened, why are you so late? I've come over because, don't you realise, everybody's waiting for you for the feast tonight. It's the Passover. And here you are, not come back yet. Why? And it would be my questions that would help them teach me their grasp of this. Does that make sense
yes.
to you?
Yeah. So they'd have that as a working document, would they?
They may or they may not. It depends on whether you want to say to the children, we're going to have a look at what this really means, or whether you are going to let them say, hey, this is the Good Samaritan story, isn't it? It's up to you.
Yes.
You've got all the choices in the world. The big choice you've made is that you think it matters that they should consider this as an important event. And if you decide, no, it's too gruesome, I don't want my class to know this, well, you better not just tell it glibly, because that wasn't why it was told in the first place. So the choice is yours. It's nasty stuff, this. This is news of the world stuff, you know.
Yes.
Now, in the second one, now, just go back a moment then. The guides would be forced by telling me, and why they're late at the Passover, for goodness sake, or any Jewish festival. I mean, you could do it according to the time of the year.
Right, yes.
They will be forced to get very close to how it was through me. So if you don't fancy yourself in that sort of role, you know, the old shepherd who comes, the old ex-shepherd, as you might say, who comes to know why they are not there when they should be there. Now the third one really, is this one. There is an agent here who says, I am going to set up a situation in which you have to relive an event. I'm an agent. I'm empowered because I am a go-between. Now, you see, if I'm a wife going to see why they're late for the feast, I'm not a go-between in the same way as the agent. The agent says, for me, with my authority, you must give me a full explanation. Now, you see, what these 9 frames give you also is you can shift time. The shepherds live in the same time as the Samaritan and the merchant and the priest and the Levite.
Yes.
But in this one, I've deliberately shifted time. I've made a modern TV program. The agent is the TV producer of the series with the authority to say, I'm inviting people who've had interesting experiences of courage to come forward, and we are going to try to examine these situations where people have found a lot of courage to do something, and we will give a kind of award. So what we're really doing is helping our audiences look at how courageous people do behave under pressure.
Right. Yeah.
So you see, we've got a camera, and we've got, in my case, I've chosen my man going from Jerusalem to Jericho in the original story is now a businessman crippled because of a mugging. 20 years ago, the man was mugged. And he was looked after by a most unusual, the person you'd have never thought would have helped him. And I've thought of some modern person who looked like they would never help anybody. And my image, because I'm a bit old-fashioned, you see, is that rather threatening image you might see, where you might see somebody with a Mohican hairstyle who looked like they wouldn't have 2 minutes to give to anybody else. I'm stereotyping, of course. They came and they helped him. Just as the other week, somebody looking like that carried my suitcase. He just took it off me and said, come on, old woman, and he took me up the steps in Birmingham New Street. So you see, here we would have a camera saying, we have an audience of people, we have a businessman, so somebody would, within the class, would say, okay, well, let's see how it would go. Somebody else will be the person in question who assisted him, and it would be the businessman who would have put him forward as being a man who showed some courage once, and I will always be grateful. Now, you see, the camera, as the agent, can say, in a rather cool way, we realise that you can't get up and show us how it was to walk that day from the office with the money to go to the bank. We can't ask you to do that. So we brought some actors in, and we wonder whether you could explain to them exactly. So we'd all be explaining to each other how it must have been. And then we'd try to act it how we think it must have been. That would be my role. I would be the person who couldn't do it. And I would be the person they'd have to remind me to make me remember it.
Yes, and they'd have to question you.
And they would be questioning me. I would be trying to remember. And my job would be to get them again as near as they could to the invention they would make. I won't invent the robbery. So all I was doing was going from there to there with some money for the bank. They will show me the streets. They'll invent the roads, the turning points. And what's more, if we had a real video camera we could use, we'd use it. If we didn't, we'd paint it. We'd set people up and say, well, I know I was just moving round the corner to the left, and in charcoal we could sketch it. Now you see here, a long time has passed. We're talking to an elderly man, still in the prime of life, still running his business, but grateful to this young man who saved his life. So when we come to pouring in oil and wine, what's the equivalent is what one would be saying. We'd be using this now to get at what is the equivalent of oil and wine if you just pick somebody up off the roadside in a gutter. What do you do? Do you take your tie off, put a tourniquet on? You know, what do you do? Now, this sort of framing demands very close scrutiny of the matching event. You see, there's no river, there's no little narrow road. There might well be a back alley, of course. That he may be dragged in a back alley. What do you remember of the thieves? Can you demonstrate? Can you help us know what you remembered? Can you make us able to do it? And so that would take you extremely close. I mean, that is really dicey stuff because it's in the modern situation. And it's perfectly reasonable. Now, of course, I wouldn't do that one with tiny children. This one we might risk with small children, not little tinies. It's a nasty tale, so, you know, there's a lot of responsibility in choosing material. My problem is, and I mean, I don't know where you stand on this, this is up to any teacher has to decide this for themselves. I can't just tell that story as if it's just nothing. I will not use it as nothing, because it isn't nothing. And it has been repeated all through time. So, if I tell it, it'll mean something, and if I work on it in drama, it'll mean something.
Right.
You take your choice. Now, this one is a safer one than that one. Here, you have an authority figure. I must reconstruct the meaning of the event because there may be other possible results arising from such events. The law may have to be changed, and so on. Now, here you see, the authority can be anyone that you choose to have. It can be in any period. In the one I've chosen, I've considered it to be the high priests of the temple. I've moved it back. Now, this is a rather negative authority. We want to know who's telling tales about priests.
Right.
Now, you see here, it's not wives wondering why you're not at the feast. It's priests who have the power in the temple to summon shepherds and bid them stop telling bad stories about priests and Levites who didn't help when they should have done. Now, you see there, the children will be in a totally different circumstance, and they will be much closer to the Jewish power of the temple. So in sequencing this, I would begin it with all the doves being sold in the temple, all the marketing that's going on, all the money changing that's going on, and the power of the priests to just have a hand in this. And then the rumours. How does a rumour spread about a market that the shepherds that we all know that live in the village just over there have been... have you heard what they were saying? One of this lot passed by on the other. Let a man lie nearly dead in the gutter, never picked him up. His donkey ran away. They must have known what had happened, you know. Just walk past, just walk past. How does rumour spread until authority has to start saying what's going on? And how do shepherds then face that sort of authority? Now, I would choose this if I wanted children to be examining just what this temple was like that Jesus threw the money changers out of.
Right, yeah.
We would learn much more about the Jewish system of religion and the way the temple operated, and we might have a bit more understanding of why Mary and Joseph took 2 doves.
So, but in this one, you're moving further away from the event to deal with other issues.
Yes, because somebody here has to know about it, because it can't go on. Now, I've chosen a fairly negative one because I'm intrigued as to it's a good reason for setting up the life of the temple. So I've had to put the poor high priest in a rather funny position, really. On the other hand, we do know from what we read in the New Testament that there were such elements went on. We're not telling any lies. But this would demand that children did a lot of research with you into just what? Reconstructing a busy temple courtyard, and a massive place it must have been, the one that there was only the Wailing Wall left. It would introduce all the business of the Roman authority as well. Why were there no soldiers there dealing with things? And so on. The priests have the power to call all witnesses, including the man who was badly hurt. And so you see, again, it's up to you to find the conventions you'll use.
Yeah.
You can't have the real robbery, but the priests have the power to say, to summon the priest who passed by, to cause him to explain what happened, and to get somebody to lie down there and to examine, did he think the man was dead? Did he go over and have a close look? What made him move along? Why did he not tell anybody when he got back? Could he have called anybody on the way? Did he meet any shepherds? Because it's the shepherds that everybody's getting this tale from. They saw you pass by. And the children would decide whether the priests who summoned, the high priests, who summoned this inquiry, whether they wanted to hush it up or whether they wanted to appeal to Rome that there must be more looking after down here. If we've got all these soldiers, why aren't they guarding us? They guard us when we want to have enterprise. Why don't they guard us when we're in danger? The children could decide with you whether these high priests are sort of sorry citizens trying to hush something up, because authority takes many faces.
Or presumably even to discipline the priest concerned.
Exactly. Because it's a case of witnesses. And of course, for some children, they may be quite interested to set it up as the high priest as a court of inquiry, not a court of punishment. Because a court of punishment, people don't really pay attention to the inquiry. They just want to get to the finish and have him hung or whatever. You see what I mean? Can you see why it's just as blood red? Because to examine and force people to answer as priests, would I have done the same? What made you really not stop? What was it about it? Did you think you'd met the thieves on the way? Did you meet any men with a donkey that looked a bit odd? And so on. You get really near, you see. Now you might think, oh, well, all they do is sit and talk about it. But they don't. The whole temple has to be alive and busy. And again, you see, you've got your conventions to do it. They may be selling only paper doves, but they're selling paper doves for paper money. And it would be then, the temple itself would be at number one. Everybody's in the event. But the authority then causes them to look at this event with it. It's very, very rich. Now you see, this is different again. I record the event. I clarify for future people. This event has to be properly explained for those who say, what really went on then? What really happened? Now, come on. There's all these rumours. They say a priest was, banished for 2 years, or they say it wasn't a thief, he probably lost his oil and invented it. No, he definitely went to the inn and he was sick, and so on. Now, my recorder, I have chosen to be the Roman consul who is not going to have a report sent back to Caesar that doesn't look good. So I'm going to find out from my troops at the inn just why there was a row at the inn that day when a guy turned up pouring blood and a Samaritan walked in. Mayhem was let loose. because people started blaming us Roman soldiers. We were only having a quiet drink. And they started shouting about, what were you doing? You should have been on the road, not sitting back here. Just like police in cars, you know, they're always in their cars, they're never where they're wanted. And so here you see, the actual thing that one would have to set up first would be, what's it like being a Roman guarding in Jerusalem? What sort of power do we feel we have? There's all those Jews carrying on alarmingly all over. I mean, Masada, look at that lot over there. You're right into biblical times, but you're into Jerusalem under the heel of Rome.
Mm.
And therefore, I mean, you can have other contexts as well.
Yes.
I've just given you this one to try and show you how approaching this from the Roman angle, what are Jews? Why all this carry on about Samaritans and Jews? They're all people, aren't they? But what does a Roman soldier have to do with it? And how does a Roman soldier approach his consul when he's on a charge for being in an inn, in a fight, when Roman soldiers are not supposed to do that?
Yeah.
Birmingham 7 or 6 or 5 or whichever lot it is. It's the same thing again. Nobody reported they'd been in a fight. It was reported by the high priest to me, you'd been in a fight. Now, people are going to inquire. I'm going to have the truth. Now, those Roman soldiers never saw the robbery. They never met anybody who'd seen the robbery. All they knew was they were there having a pint or whatever when all hell was let loose because somebody turned round and said, and where were you? There's a guy nearly been half killed just outside here, and you're supposed to look after us. And so the fight came. They won't be caring about the wounded soldier. They'll be caring about why they ended up with 2 broken ribs and a bad leg. And does that make sense again? Now, you see, the knowledge children will have of the times will be totally different. They don't buy and sell sheep. They don't go into the temple except perhaps to change some money. In fact, they probably don't go in there if they can avoid it. Certain ones will go in there, but not folk like us. What's the Roman system of promotion? How far away is Caesar? What does a Roman soldier live by? He's no Jew. He believes in Mithras. What gods does he worship? And, you know, what God does he call on when he says, oh my God, we're in a mess now? Mithraic gods. So you have a chance there, you see, for the 2 kinds of gods to come together. It's fairly advanced religious studies if you choose it to be. And of course it's to do with the courage of the one who stood up for humanity. Not for rank or power. He stood up because he said, there's a man here hurt, and I'll pick him up. So that frame gives you that sort of range.
Yes, I can see it.
The main thing is, it has to be cleared up because people will say, what really happened? There's your Birmingham 7. What really happened? So you see, you get all kinds of witnesses coming in on this one. The Samaritan may not be traceable. He's gone back to wherever he was coming from. The man may not yet be well enough to deal with it. He may have doesn't wish to talk about it because he's quite broken by the event. The priest can be called in. The Levite can be called in. The innkeeper can be called in. All the people in the inn can be called in. Who is my enemy is a question there.
Yes.
Because when that Samaritan knocked on the door and the innkeeper opened the door, imagine the shock. It'd be like something from Mars.
And with this one, the recorder doesn't need to be impartial.
No. Because somebody's going to ask. He can be impartial. You see, you can say to the children, do you want me as your consul until we get some consuls, you know, because somebody has to start it. My belief in being the consul will sustain the class into believing they are Romans. And eventually other people too, because by contract they can stop being a Roman and start being a Jew to get the other point of view. They can all be Samaritans if they want, because we can all stand in the position of the Samaritan at the inn door to try and explain to the consul what we think was in his mind. Speaking as a Samaritan, I might be able to say to the consul, well, I reckon he'd be thinking something like this. So we'd be looking really at historical truth as far as we could find out. You know, why was there enmity between the Samaritans? What were the Romans really doing in Jerusalem at that time? Was it at the time of Masada? Or was it after Masada? And you may say, oh, I don't want to be bothered with all that. It's up to you, really. The consul, of course, could demand a very specific level of language. I wish you to give me no emotional response. It is my task to put down what happened factually. Stick to facts. It's a way of helping children distinguish between accounting, recounting, feeling it, telling it, and specifying it. So according to the recorder, thus you can breed your language. Because I will write exactly what you say in this. So I could actually say, tell you what, let's make a record for Caesar that is entirely based on the feelings his soldiers have of being so cut off from Rome. Just another straw. Now let's try it again. And let's try the coolest possible statement we could make to Caesar so that he sends nobody to look into the matter. Their language will be bred out of the context. And I can think of 16 different ways of writing a report, can't you?
Yes.
And every soldier could be forced. I mean, we could do it as a contract. Let's all write our own with a very, very big chip on our shoulders about, you know, I haven't had leave for 5 months and no wonder I got into a row, you know, and dear Caesar, you know, and my mother has not yet sent me my new cloak, and so on and so on. You've got a range of things, because any recorder can insist that every soldier writes his own report. And what's more, if you want, you can do it on wax with styluses. And I'll bet you fairly brief, you see. Because young children could easily do that on wax with styluses, because they're easy to make. You know, you only need a bit of beeswax, and it'll come in forever. Now, you see, we come to the press. Now, the press is the story keeper, because they publish publicly. And the press has a right to say, okay, I wasn't there, but I can tell you how it might have been. And what's more, I understand it this way, so I'm going to sell it to you with a bias. Now, the bias needn't be negative. It's just that, you see, I provide a commentary because I think this event is important enough to tell you about. Now, in this one, I have to just check the context I was going to use, because I have a feeling the press, wait a minute, here, where are we? I'm not going to be able to find it very quickly. So I'll just invent a new one if I can't find it quickly. I'll just leave it for the moment. Let's say that the person is Joseph, who is known to have written after Masada, when Masada had happened and they let the one woman live so that she could explain to everybody why all the rest had committed suicide under the heel of Rome. Joseph, who was in with Rome, was selected to write the story of Masada. So there is, if you set it in its own time, even though Masada may not be in Jesus' time, of course it isn't, but if you set it that Joseph has a vested interest in pleasing the Romans. Now, how does he describe the road from Jerusalem to Jericho? How does he describe this land of ours? He's walking a very narrow track. So if we are pressmen who have to write this tale to please Rome, so that we shall have to take our copy to some very high up person, indeed we may have to take it to the high priest first, and then we have to sell another version to the Romans before they would allow it to be put in the hands of the scribes. Shall this go down in history? Shall there be this version for this scribe to write that will be housed in this place, and or shall it be here and housed and sent through to Caesar, about the nature of life in Jerusalem, the merchandising, the sorts of merchants that pass by here? It would be in the general tenor of, Palestine is all right, thank you. You don't need to send anybody else. We're dealing with it very well. Now, you see, for them to get at it, who do they consult? They can consult reports. They might be able to interview the man who is now able to be found. How do the press seek about to locate the man who was going from Jerusalem to Jericho? Who do your children become? They will become many kinds of people because the press needs to meet many kinds of people. So you see, at one stage, by contract, the children may be in the inn. Oh, yes, we were there. We happened to see it. Yes, well, we'll tell you, who are you writing this for? So they will see it from the point of view of who the guy is writing it for. The questions he asks them, or she, of course, asks them. The children themselves may be the press, and I may be the Samaritan. Mind, if you're caught talking to a Samaritan, by the Jews, they're not going to believe much about your report. They'll discount it straight away. You do realise that, don't you? And so on. So I'm not suggesting that I'm the press and they're everybody else, that they can be the press all the time. How do they change their language if they speak to a Samaritan that they don't have a lot of respect for? Even though he did do quite mind, it's a pity he hadn't been one of us. But still, never mind, we can play that bit down. And then, how do they speak to Roman soldiers who should have been on duty on the road but weren't? And, what's their view of how they translate this evidence? Because those Roman soldiers might be really thinking this Samaritan was a good guy, he did very well, but I can't put that in because the editing out for the Jewish temple and for the Romans will be quite different. Now, you see, I would look at that possibly if I was trying to help children realize that most things that they read are biased. And I don't mean that negatively. That if you read in a history book that William the Conqueror was promised the throne by Edward, you might in another history book read that he was led to believe he'd get it. They're both written, and William in each case invaded. I mean, let's face it, he did come and conquer. But being led to believe, as one historian puts it, is quite different than being promised it. And so there, purely as a short exercise in writing the same report for three different groups of people, you might say, well, I don't need the Good Samaritan for that. And I'd say, but one of the values of using the Good Samaritan is, A, it is a perennial recurring circumstance of greed and neglect and heroics You can look round every day and find such examples. Secondly, if you set it back in early Palestine, you can just get a cleaner view of something because it's not coloured by the immediacy of today.
Yes.
And it allows you to get people off guard a little bit.
Yes, they're not themselves quite.
That's right. They can come cleaner to it, to the events of it. But it's in the context of bias, in that case, if that's what you choose to do. And, of course, with high school students, you may well say, OK, here are the facts. A man, this is what was said at the time, as somebody told us of this. Let's look at the Daily Mirror, and let's get the style to put that as a Daily Mirror report today. Now let's have a look at the Guardian. Remember, this is a highly charged political situation. It's not just a story about a guy. You know, there's all sorts of things going on around here. It is a country under the heel of another nation. And everything, every fracas like this would affect everybody. Now let's have a look at how the Sunday Independent would deal with it. So it means a close scrutiny. And you wouldn't be standing up and acting it at all. You'd be getting all the daily newspapers, reading them, and differentiating between the styles and presumably having some fun with doing it. Now then, let's have a look at this one. You see, we're still on the deep red. We're still coming very near.
Right.
In fact, that Daily Mirror, come Guardian, come whatever, would get you terribly near in each case. And if people came in, they wouldn't think you were dramatising at all, because you can't take the top off your head to show how 9 ways of writing it gives you 9 different dramatic experiences of it. And you'd have an exhibition, wouldn't you then, of all the different styles. And some people would find it was dead easy to write in this style, but they'd have scrutinised all those newspapers, and maybe a bit of good would be done. Because you're not having to say, don't read that and read that. That's nothing to do with you. So now we research the event. I want to throw new light on it because some time has passed. Now you see here, you've got to have a reason why we have to look into it. Now, the one I've chosen is that if we are running a modern hospice, and we want to scrutinise, we want to find a logo for our hospice. Now, the Good Samaritan is a wonderful one, because look at what he did. He ploughed in there, and nobody else could help. He got in there and said, I will look after him. He didn't say, I saved his life. He said, whatsoever else he needs, I will come and deal with it when I can. So if people were saying, we want to, we'll hire some consultants, and we'd like to use the Samaritan as our image, we never stop helping, and what's more, we help anybody, regardless of wealth. If they need, if we can, thus we do. So you see, the class in this case would be a firm of consultants who have to check on this tale, this long tale that happened ages ago that nobody bothers much about now. It's shut in a right big book with small print on thin paper. But they want us to look at it to see how we could use it in publishing about our hospice. We are going to produce brochures, the kind of language in these brochures that sort of story that could get through to help people say, oh, yes, oh, I certainly would like to contribute to that. So if we want to open a new ward that we can't yet staff, and we want to blitz on the local community, if that's the right word, to really get home to them, this is what we do. There's blood and guts here. How do they scrutinise that story to make the most of it, to make direct appeals? What sort of photographs? What sort of drawings? What sort of logo? And the hardest one is the logo, because a logo has to say it instantly. Print can go on wandering about a bit and give examples, but a logo has to be the Samaritan that picks you up, you see. Now there, you see, they would simply be sitting, working as consultants, interviewing, talking to people in the hospice. So sometimes by contract they would be hospice workers, explaining the work of the hospice. There may be architects at some stage designing the hospice, looking into the ward, the equipment of such wards, and finally producing the brochure with the Good Samaritan logo that they possibly then would put into a radio program, interview local people about it, and so on. Now, I haven't gone into all the how would they become the local people and how would they do this, because that is a matter of conventions, you see.
Yeah.
One of their first visitors to the hospice may well be a crippled person who wants to give some money and has only just been able to learn about this appeal because they never get out, but they've heard it on the radio. So these people could do the sorts of programs, the weekly Sunday appeal, they could develop that as part of their job. They could run a TV program, which they would invent, of course, in the classroom, and demonstrate the Good Samaritan story and show how this is an exact parallel. We didn't do the mugging, we deal with people who are sick. And what's more, we deal with them when other people pass them by. You see, it's an absolute...
So the actual, their job would be to try to translate that into modern times.
Yes, yes, in this case I've set it as a hospice. But of course, if you research an event, it's always happened before. And the further away it's happened allows you to deal with, well, you know, there's new ways of looking at this now because, and so on. Now there are the last two here, which I'll deal with together, but here we compare this event with others. So you see, we might look at stories, all of which have heroism in them, and this one of the Good Samaritan. And what we might be looking for here is, what is a hero? How are heroes recognized, and so on.
Right.
So the children might be compiling a wax museum of heroes. People who, against all the odds, found they could do something under pressure. We're not talking about Batman now, you know, with special powers. We're talking about ordinary people and heroics, and they could create a wax museum of heroes, one of whom would be the Samaritan from which you'd begin.
Right.
Now, you see, the artist translates the event to use it in a totally different way. Now, the context I've set in here is, if you want a stained glass window based on the Good Samaritan to be put, and this sounds a bit silly, in a restaurant which is going to be at the end of the Channel Tunnel that says, "We care." How many stories, you know, we care, the Good Samaritan, we care for you, we are an inn, we care for you whatever your needs are. So how would a group of artists create sculptural models, design the china, do the uniforms, set up the decor that says, "We care, and this is our material that we'd like you to take."
Yeah.
What sort of china? How many table mats? What sort of pictures on the table mats? And the stained glass window that the light always shines through, because we care for you in transit. Transit. A man went forth. Now, do you see what I mean by frame?
Yeah. Yes.
If you're not too bewildered. And they are all as close to the theme as human nature can get you,
Yes.
that you'd learn totally
And
differently.
the interesting thing is that they don't need to be all in that time period. They can, you can take out.
That's right. But you must honour the Good Samaritan. The story is all in there. 22 different episodes. And there's one happening right now, I'll bet you, somewhere in the world.
Yes.
And all stories do this. This is the gift of stories, provided you use frame. Right, I hope you haven't got indigestion.
No,
And I
I've
hope
got a
you
lot to
haven't
think
got
about.
indigestion.